I never expected Nate's death to affect me the way it did. When I first heard the news, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. 33 years old, gone, just like that. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the bitter, messy end of our relationship. I had convinced myself, and everyone around me, that I had moved on. What we had was toxic, manipulative, something I was better off without. But grief doesn't follow logic. It doesn't care about the labels we give our past, nor does it separate love from pain. It simply exists, an undeniable force that crashes into us when we least expect it. The days following the news were a blur. Memories I thought I'd buried long ago resurfaced without warning. I could hear our laughter echoing in my mind. Picture us driving with the windows down. Feel the way he used to pull me close when I was upset. The inside jokes that no one else understood suddenly felt precious. But just as quickly, the darker memories crept in, the fights, the betrayals, the nights I lay in bed, tears soaking my pillow, wondering why I was enough. I hated how conflicted I felt. How could I mourn someone who had hurt me so deeply? Andrew noticed before I even said a word. My husband had always been perceptive, attuned to the subtlest shifts in my mood. At first, he assumed it was just the shock of hearing about Nate's death. After all, loss is never easy, no matter the circumstances. But as days turned into weeks and I remained distant, lost in my own thoughts, he started asking questions. "Why is this hitting you so hard?" he asked one evening, his voice careful but edged with something else, something I couldn't quite name. "You always said he was awful to you." I had no answer. Or maybe I did, but it was too tangled, too raw to put into words. How could I explain that grief isn't just about losing a person? It's also about losing the version of yourself that existed with them. That even the worst relationships leave scars, and sometimes, even after all the hurt, you miss the way they made you feel. Instead of talking to Andrew, I turned inward, drowning in the past. I dug up old photos, reached out to mutual friends, and posted vague, sentimental tributes online. Carefully curated, of course. There was no mention of the screaming matches, the broken promises, or the nights I cried in my best friend's arms after our final breakup. It was easier to remember the good times, to let the bad ones fade into the background. But Andrew wasn't fooled. He saw the contradictions, the way I had spent years calling Nate manipulative, only to now act like he had been an irreplaceable light in my life. The more I withdrew, the more he pushed, until one night, the truth came spilling out. "Who are you mourning?" he asked, his voice raw. "The real Nate? Or the one you've rewritten in your head?" I didn't know, and that was the worst part. Going to the funeral only made things more complicated. I sat there, listening to his family and friends describe their Nate, the kind, generous, funny man they had known. It felt like a punch to the gut. Was this the same person who had lied to me? Who had made me feel small? Or had I only ever seen one version of him? And then there was Andrew, watching me from across the room, his expression unreadable. But I could see the hurt in his eyes, the doubt creeping in. Was I still in love with Nate? Had Andrew just been a rebound? I didn't have answers. And that uncertainty poisoned everything. Things unraveled quickly after that. Andrew found out things I had never told him. The way I had cheated, how I had blocked Nate, without ever truly explaining why, how I had left things unfinished. Andrew had always believed in honesty, in facing hard truths head on. And now, he was realizing I had been running from mine for years. The night he packed his bag, I stood in the doorway, numb. "You need to figure out what you really want," he said quietly. "Because right now I don't think it's me." For the first time in years, I was alone with my thoughts. No distractions. No excuses. Just me and the past I had spent so long avoiding. It took months. Sleepless nights. Tear-stained journal pages. Conversations with friends who knew me better than I knew myself. But slowly, I began to understand. Mourning Nate wasn't just about losing him. It was about facing the parts of myself I had ignored for too long. The guilt, the regret, the fear that maybe, just maybe, I had never loved Andrew the way he deserved. A year later, 2 invitations arrived within days of each other. One was for Nate's memorial, a gathering to honor a life cut short. The other was a wedding invitation. Andrew's name was on it, alongside a woman I didn't know. I sat there, holding both, and realized this was closure. Not a neat, happy ending, but the quiet understanding that some stories must end so others can begin. I went to the memorial. I said my goodbyes to Nate, to the girl I had been when I loved him, to the lies I had told myself for years. And then I let him go. As for the wedding invitation, I didn't RSVP, but I didn't throw it away either. Somewhere between the grief and the guilt, I had found something I never expected. Forgiveness. For Nate. For Andrew. And finally for myself.